Howdy my totally tubular sharkaholics. We're back for the Shark Scale Year 4. Today's movie is Terror Storm, or also known as Cyclone. I guess it has two names. I don't really know why. It's another oldie, yep, it's another old shark movie that we're looking at. This one is, again, one of the oldest movies that we're looking at on this channel, but who knows, maybe it's a hidden gem, that's for sure. I've been wanting to look at this one for a couple of years, but I'm glad we're finally getting to it. After all that, though, is it actually even any good? Find out.
The first thing I will mention is that the movie is free on YouTube, which is where I watched it, and for some reason there's a giant K in the middle of the screen. Don't really know why, but the movie's going to be in the description. Alright, so the story of Cyclone / Terror Storm tries to be at least a little different from the norm. The movie sees a number of people out on a tour boat. I guess it's just supposed to be like a nice vacation tour boat that goes on the water and then eventually comes back to the beach, almost for like a shitty cruise. They're out at sea for maybe a day or two. In addition to this, there's a plane flying over the water to try to get to its location, and then there's even a boat of fishermen as well. All three of these sets of people have one thing in common. They're all heavily affected by this huge storm that hits the coast. It causes the tour boat to go completely off its course, the fisherman gets lost at sea, and the plane just straight crashes into the ocean. Some of the people are rescued from the plane, however a lot of them are stranded out in the middle of the sea with no help whatsoever. It kind of reminds me of Open Water, and this came out like 25 years before Open Water ever came out. However, all three groups of people all eventually meet up together and get on this tour boat and have to try to survive until somebody comes to rescue them. The movie is really about these people trying to survive out on the water with basically nothing. They have to contend with dehydration, starvation, cannibalism, just straight annoyance with each other, and of course, the sharks. The story isn't that bad, and it actually is decently different, especially for the time. There's like not a single beach really in this movie, and almost the entire movie takes place out on the water. So for the time, I will give it some credit actually. It was original. The movie is much more of a survival film rather than a shark movie, but the sharks do play an important role in this movie. Taking the movie's age into account, I think the plot is actually pretty alright, and you can really see the struggle that these people go through. Naturally, they are very giving at first, however as time continues on, they become very greedy and selfish towards each other, as it eventually boils down to it's either you or me. And they have to do some pretty dark things to survive in this movie. And this is a really dark movie. Actually, for the most part, it makes you feel kind of helpless. It's borderline disturbing even in a few spots. So while it was good at getting that disturbed emotion out of me, something got a different emotion out of me, and that was the movie's length and its pacing. That emotion that was evoked was annoyance, tedium, and a little bit of boredom. I understand that they want to show these people suffering, but this movie does go on just way too long. The movie is nearly 2 hours long, which is one of the longest shark movies that I've ever looked at on this channel by default. And some parts of this movie were just absolutely not needed. It just kind of drags in a few spots, and there's way too many establishing shots to try to give the bad feels out, but it just kind of left me bored rather than anything else. Like, I get how shitty their situation is. I don't need to stare at them for extra minutes on end. Like, I get it, okay? Alright, like Night of the Sharks, I did have this movie at 1.25 speed since it is on YouTube to try to speed things up even a little bit just to get through the movie with some of its slower parts. If it wasn't for this questionable, generally poor pacing, I would actually say that the story is decent enough. However, this just kind of drags it down to a mediocre level. Sure, it's the upper echelon of mediocre, but it's still mediocre. And that's cutting it some slack because this movie's over 40 years old. And unfortunately, this pacing actually also carries over to the sharks in the movie as well. The pacing of the sharks in this movie is very poor, much worse than the actual pacing of the movie in general. A shark shows up kinda near the beginning when everybody is first in the water, then it makes like almost a cameo appearance in the middle, like that's how quick we're talking. And then the sharks are in the very end of the movie, like we're talking the last 2 minutes of the movie the sharks are there, and that's it. Like, I really wish that the sharks were spaced out a bit better and weren't so backloaded. It would have really helped this movie's pacing in general if the sharks were more prevalent and more in the movie. It would have been something to make it more interesting so that I didn't want to fall asleep. When the sharks do show up, I'm pretty sure most of this has got to be like some B-roll footage or some kind of stock footage in some way, because I don't know too much about film in the 1970s. I'm not an expert at it. Look at the movies I review. It's clear I'm not an expert. But this has got to be some B-roll footage or some stock footage because it just looked really good. not only did it look really good, the sharks like legit looked really good, but like it looked like it was filmed for a completely different movie. It doesn't look like it was filmed for this movie in particular, and it looks like it might even be taken out of context from another movie that was higher produced, or I'm not too sure. Either way, I will say that whenever the sharks do show up on screen, they look really good. It's clearly there's something real here. The sharks are awesome. You see them chewing up stuff. It looks very lifelike. It's kind of disturbing the way they actually go after some of these people or whatever else they're going after. I'm not going to spoil too much. And it looks awesome. Again, it makes me wonder, like, there's no way this was filmed for this movie. This looks just way too good. The way that they kill people, air quotes, is really brutal in this movie. And it really is just very lifelike. Like, you see these sharks just totally crunching down on whatever they're eating. Like, it just looks very good. And I'm, like, kind of surprised with how good it looks. It's maybe the best part of the movie is how good these sharks look. And when it comes to sticking with that illusion, it's really brutal, like, and it keeps with the theme of the movie being quite visceral and just raw. These kills were just really good. I wish there was a lot more of them, and I wish they had showed up throughout the movie instead of the last 2 minutes. It wasn't really worth sitting through an hour and 50 minutes of people complaining and suffering to see the sharks get a tasty bite out of them. But hey, when they do show up, it's actually quite good. And they do have a good amount of meaning behind them. This isn't no random shots of the shark either. Okay, so if the sharks aren't really in all that much, and it's mostly the people, how are the people? Well, the people are fine enough. It's very 70s, it's very by the numbers, and again, it's really standard for the time. There really isn't anything to comment on when it comes to the acting, because it's what you would expect. I know there were some big stars in this movie for the 70s, and everyone is fine enough. I wouldn't say there's a single bad actor or actress in this movie, but nobody particularly stands out. A lot of the dialogue and just general writing in this movie is very benign, it's very average. There's nothing really interesting here, and all the stereotypes are played up. Really, what I'm trying to say is it's really quite cheesy. Even when the movie is supposed to be super serious, I found it still pretty cheesy, and a few parts were almost laughably silly, especially when they talk about religion. Maybe that's a 2021 thing, though. Hey, at least they were able to sell the situation decently well, and when they argued with each other, it felt like they really wanted to argue with each other. You could almost believe it, so there is that. Does this allow the movie to hold up and go on as long as it does? No, absolutely not. The acting does not save this movie to that extent, and it was not enough to keep me from getting bored during parts of it. Another part of the movie I would like to bring up is the music that shows up in this movie. There's a couple music tracks that play throughout the movie. These sound ridiculous. They're incredibly cheesy, sound very out of place, and they sound like they belong in a 70s porn. I don't really know why these are here. They just kind of kill the vibe that the movie's going for, and it just kind of made me chuckle. No reason for these. Additionally, there are a few scenes that showed natural disasters happening from the storm that happens in the movie, and just like the sharks, I'm pretty certain this was filmed for another movie or some form of B-roll or stock footage or something, because this looks way too good for this movie. It looks incredible. It's clear that these storms actually happened, and like, this destruction that actually happens is totally real. It's a shame that so much stuff actually got destroyed, but it does look incredible on screen, even nowadays, and it looks pretty good since, you know, it actually happened. But let's wrap this up. Is this movie worth watching at all? No, I don't think it's worth watching. While the movie does have some pretty dark themes and is able to evoke certain emotions, the movie ultimately just goes on way too long for its own good, and too many parts of the movie are boring. The sharks at the very end are actually really well done, the destruction by the storm is really well done, and the kills, all around, very well handled, taken seriously, and while there are a few big stars from the 70s here, the movie as a whole drags on and just really fails to stay engaging for around half of it. There are a few scenes that are quite powerful, but most of the time they're really just sitting around with nothing happening. I think if they chopped off maybe 20-25 minutes of this movie, it'd probably be a cult classic in many regards, especially in the disaster genre of movies. Sadly, though, I wouldn't really say this is a cult classic, and the movie is generally mediocre thanks to its boring dialogue, long length, and poor pacing of the sharks. I wish this movie was better, I really do. I wish it was shorter because they really had something on their hands here. But sadly, it's just going to go down as another crappy shark movie. I feel like the movie did not respect my time for the most part, but I can see the few positives this movie brings. I wouldn't say it's a complete disaster or unwatchable, but the movie has very little going for it. Thanks to a few decent aspects, it gets, on the shark scale, a 2 out of 5, with the rating of meh. It's not the worst shark movie I've seen. Hell, it's not even the worst from I've seen from the 70s. I've seen a hell of a lot worse from the last few days, weeks, whatever it is. Still wouldn't recommend this movie to you, though. The shark scenes, maybe. And if for whatever reason you'd want to watch the movie, I put the link in the description. Either way, have a great day, have a great Christmas, have a great 4th of July, whatever you're going to celebrate. Stay safe. See ya.